Frank Morrison was 63 years old. He had served in the United States Marine Corps for 30 years. He had seen war. He had seen death. He had seen things that still visited him in his dreams. But all of that was behind him now. He lived alone on a small farm in Montana, surrounded by mountains and silence. His days were simple. He woke up early, made coffee, and sat on his porch to watch the sun rise over the trees. He wanted peace. He wanted quiet. He wanted nothing more than to live out his remaining years without any trouble. The universe had other plans. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Frank was in his study, looking through some old photographs from his military days. The room was small and comfortable, with a wooden desk that had belonged to his father and shelves filled with books he had collected over the years. Sunlight came through the window and fell across the floor in warm golden squares. Then he heard a sound. It was soft, like a small animal moving in the corner. Frank looked up from his photographs and listened. The sound came again. It was coming from under his desk. He stood slowly and walked around the desk. What he saw made him stop completely. Two small creatures were huddled together in the dark space beneath the wooden desk. They were about the size of human children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, but they were not human. Their bodies were covered in silver-white fur that looked as soft as clouds. Their ears were long and pointed, pressed flat against their heads in fear. Their eyes were violet, bright and beautiful, and they reflected light like jewels. They looked like wolves. But they stood on 2 legs, and they wore torn clothing that looked like some kind of uniform. Frank had seen many strange things in his life. Humans had made first contact with alien life 8 years ago. He had watched it on television like everyone else. He knew that the galaxy was full of different species, different worlds, different ways of living. But he had never expected to find aliens hiding under his desk in rural Montana. The larger one looked up at him. Around her neck was a metal collar that glowed with blue light. When she spoke, her mouth moved in ways that did not match the words, and Frank understood that the collar was some kind of translation device. "Please," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Please do not send us back." Frank looked at the 2 small Volf-like aliens. He looked at their frightened eyes and their trembling bodies. He thought about all the scared young soldiers he had seen over the years, boys and girls far from home, facing things they did not understand. He pulled up a chair and sat down so that he was at their level. He kept his voice calm and gentle. "How about you tell me your names first?" he said. "Then we can figure out the rest." The larger one swallowed hard. "I am Vera," she said. "This is my sister Kessa." "All right, Vera, Kessa." Frank nodded at each of them in turn. "I am Frank. Now, you want to tell me how you ended up under my desk?" The story came out slowly, piece by piece. Vera did most of the talking while Kessa stayed close to her side, watching Frank with those big violet eyes. They were princesses. Their mother was Empress Lorena of the Volhari Dominion, ruler of 40 star systems. The Volhari were a proud warrior species, respected and feared throughout the galaxy. Vera and Kessa had been sent to the Galactic Academy on Station Meridian, the most famous school in known space. Children of nobles and diplomats from hundreds of worlds studied there together, but the academy was not what they had expected. "The other students hate us," Vera said. Her voice was bitter now, angry. "They call us animals. They say we are primitives pretending to be civilized. They say our mother bought her throne with blood and teeth. They hurt us," Kessa added quietly. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was small and soft. "Not with weapons. With words. With actions. The teachers see it, but they do nothing." "So you ran away," Frank said. Vera lifted her chin. There was pride in her eyes now, alongside the fear. "We stole a shuttle. We programmed it to find somewhere safe. Somewhere far from the Academy, far from the Dominion, far from everyone who wanted to use us or hurt us." "And it brought you here?" Frank said. "Your world is considered primitive," Vera explained. "The galaxy does not pay attention to Earth. We thought we could hide here." Frank almost smiled at that. Primitive. He supposed that was true enough, from a certain point of view. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage. They had no great fleets, no powerful allies, no ancient traditions of space travel. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was a backwater world of little importance, but right now that made it the perfect hiding spot for two scared little girls. "Well," Frank said, standing up slowly, "I reckon you two are hungry." He led them to the kitchen and made scrambled eggs and bacon. The girls sat at his table and watched him with wide eyes as he cooked. When he set the plates in front of them, they sniffed the food carefully before taking their first bites. Kessa's eyes went wide. Her tail, which Frank had not noticed before, began to wag back and forth with excitement. "What is this?" she asked, holding up a strip of bacon. "That is bacon," Frank said. "Comes from a pig?" "It is the greatest thing I have ever tasted," Kessa declared. She stuffed 3 more pieces into her mouth. Vera was more controlled, but she ate just as eagerly. She finished 3 plates of eggs and asked for more. Frank made more without complaint. For a little while, the kitchen was peaceful. The morning sun came through the windows. The smell of food filled the air. 2 alien princesses ate breakfast at a human farmer's table, and for just a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then Frank heard the sound of engines in the sky. He walked to the window and looked up. 3 spacecraft were descending toward his property. 2 of them were sleek and official-looking, marked with symbols he did not recognize. The third was larger, more elegant, decorated with patterns that reminded him of the uniforms the girls wore. "They found us," Kessa whispered. Her ears pressed flat again, and all the joy drained from her face. Vera stood and moved in front of her sister. "We will not go back. We will not." Frank looked at the 2 girls. He looked at the ships landing in his field. He thought about what was waiting for them at that academy, and he thought about the fear in their eyes. Then he walked to the closet by the door and took out his shotgun. "You two stay inside," he said. "Let me handle this." He stepped out onto the porch just as soldiers in gleaming armor began to surround his farmhouse. There were dozens of them, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. Behind them came officers in formal uniforms, and at the front was a tall Volhari with dark gray fur and cold golden eyes. "Human," the Volhari commander said. His voice was hard and sharp. "I am Commander Kareth of the Imperial Guard. You are harboring fugitives of the Volhari Dominion. Surrender them immediately or face the consequences." Frank leaned against the porch railing, shotgun resting easy against his shoulder. "Now hold on just a minute," he said calmly. "How about you come inside and we discuss this like civilized folk? I just made coffee." Commander Kareth stared at him. The soldiers stared at him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the commander walked toward the porch. His eyes never left Frank's face. "You are either very brave or very foolish," Kareth said. "A little bit of both, probably," Frank admitted. "Come on in." The girls are eating pie. And that was how Frank Morrison, retired Marine, became the first human to host a galactic diplomatic incident in his kitchen. Commander Kareth stood in Frank's kitchen, looking completely out of place. He was tall and powerful, dressed in armor that probably cost more than Frank's entire farm. His soldiers waited outside, weapons ready. 2 galactic enforcement cruisers hovered in the sky, their shadows falling across the fields, and there sat Vera and Kessa at the kitchen table, eating apple pie. "They have not been this calm in months," Kareth said quietly. He was watching the girls through the window, and something in his hard expression had softened. "They have escaped 6 times now. Each time we find them, they are more afraid, more angry. Each time we bring them back, it gets worse." Frank poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to the commander. Kareth looked at it with confusion, but accepted it anyway. "Maybe the problem is not the girls," Frank said. Kareth was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed too tired for such a powerful warrior. "The Academy is the finest institution in the galaxy," he said. "Children of emperors and kings have studied there for 10,000 years. It is an honor beyond measure." "An honor that makes them run away 6 times?" Kareth had no answer for that. In the end, they took the girls back. There was nothing Frank could do. He had no authority, no power, no standing in galactic politics. He was just a retired soldier on a small farm in Montana, but before she left, Vera turned to look at him. Her violet eyes were full of something Frank recognized. It was hope. "Thank you," she said. "For the food. For listening." "You're welcome back any time," Frank said. He meant it. 3 weeks later, they came back. Frank was in his workshop, working on an old motorcycle that had belonged to his father. The engine was stubborn and refused to start, and he had spent most of the morning taking it apart piece by piece. His hands were covered in grease and his back was aching, but he did not mind. This was the kind of problem he understood. Mechanical problems had solutions. You just had to find them. Then he heard the sound of a spacecraft landing in his field. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked outside. The same small shuttle sat in the grass, looking even more damaged than before. Scorch marks covered its hull, and one of the wings was bent at an odd angle. Vera and Kessa climbed out. They looked exhausted. Their fur was dirty and tangled, and their eyes had dark circles beneath them. But when they saw Frank, they both smiled. "We came back," Kessa said. Her tail wagged once, weakly. "I can see that," Frank said. "Come on inside." He made them hot chocolate this time. They had never tasted it before. Kessa declared it even better than bacon, which Frank took as high praise. As they drank, Vera told him what had happened. "The Galactic Council sent investigators after our last escape," she explained. Her hands wrapped tight around the warm mug. "They spoke to us, to the teachers, to the other students. Then they released their report." "What did it say?" Vera's expression turned bitter. "They said we were exaggerating. They said children often struggle to adapt to new environments. They said we needed to learn to be stronger, to not let small things bother us." "Small things," Kessa repeated. Her voice was very quiet. "A boy named Torvis pushed Kessa into a reactor coolant pool," Vera said. Her eyes blazed with anger. The water was cold enough to stop her heart. She was in the medical bay for 3 days. Torvis received a warning. Frank set down his coffee cup very slowly. "A warning," he said. "His family is powerful," Vera said. "The Kasori have 14 seats on the Galactic Council. We are Volhari. We are warriors. We are supposed to be able to handle such things." Frank looked at Kessa. She was staring at her hot chocolate, not meeting his eyes. He thought about what it must feel like to nearly die and then be told it was not important. "That is not right," he said. "And I think you know that." "Of course we know," Vera said. "But knowing does not change anything. The Academy does not care. The Council does not care. Even our mother cannot act openly without causing a diplomatic crisis." Frank was quiet for a long time. He thought about bureaucracies and bullies and the way powerful people protected each other. He thought about all the young soldiers he had known, who had been chewed up and spit out by systems that did not care about them. Then he thought about a few phone calls he could make. "You girls get some sleep," he said. "I have some work to do." He spent the night on the phone. His old squadmate Pete Langley was a senator now. They had not spoken in years, but Pete owed him from a time in Jakarta when Frank had pulled him out of a burning building. Frank called in that debt. His former commanding officer, Lieutenant General Carol Briggs, sat on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She was one of the most powerful military officers in the country. Frank had served under her for 15 years. And she trusted his judgment completely. By morning, Frank had arranged something unprecedented. When the diplomatic vessels arrived, there were more of them this time. Volhari ships, yes, but also human vessels. Military escorts. News drones from a dozen networks, and descending from the largest ship came Empress Lerna herself. Frank watched her approach. She was tall, taller than Kareth, with silver fur that seemed to glow in the morning light. She wore armor decorated with precious stones and symbols of her rank. Her eyes were the same violet as her daughter's, but harder, colder. Carrying the weight of ruling 40 star systems, she stopped at the bottom of his porch steps and looked up at him. "You are the human who keeps finding my daughters," she said. "Technically, they keep finding me," Frank replied. The Empress studied him for a long moment. Her guards shifted nervously, but she showed no fear. "I have read your file, Frank Morrison," she said. 3 purple hearts. A silver star. You saved 47 lives during an incident in a place called Jakarta. You refused all recognition for your actions. Frank shrugged. "Just did what needed doing." "That is precisely why my daughters trust you." Lirina's voice softened slightly. "They do not trust easily. The Volhari are warriors. We are taught from birth that strength is everything, that weakness must be hidden at all costs. But my daughters have gentle hearts. They feel things deeply. The galaxy sees this as weakness. I fear what the Academy is doing to their spirits." Behind her, Frank could see the news drones recording everything. This was already becoming a galactic incident. A retired human soldier hosting the Empress of the Volhari Dominion discussing the education of royal children. It would be on every news feed in the galaxy by evening. Frank did not care about any of that. He cared about 2 scared girls who had crossed the stars looking for safety. "Your daughters are not weak," he said. "They are brave. It takes courage to run away from something that is hurting you. It takes courage to ask for help." Lirana tilted her head, considering his words. "And what would you suggest?" she asked. "I cannot simply remove them from the Academy. The political consequences would be severe. Treaties and alliances depend on Volhari participation in galactic institutions." "I understand," Frank said. "But there might be another way." He told her his idea. It was simple, maybe even foolish. But Lirena listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was silent for a long time. "You would do this?" she finally asked. "You would take responsibility for my daughter's education? You, a human with no formal training, no galactic credentials, no understanding of interstellar politics?" Frank smiled slightly. "I understand one thing pretty well. I understand how to help young people find their courage. And I think that is what your daughters need more than politics." Lirana looked past him, toward the farmhouse. Through the window she could see her daughters sitting at the kitchen table. Kessa was laughing at something, showing her fangs in a wide grin. Vera was reading one of Frank's old books, her tail swishing slowly back and forth. They looked happy. They looked safe. "1 year," Lirana said finally. "I will give you 1 galactic standard year. If my daughters are better at the end of it, if they have learned and grown, then perhaps the galaxy needs to reconsider what education truly means." She extended her hand in the human fashion. Frank shook it. Neither of them knew it then, but they had just started something that would change the galaxy forever. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. 2 alien princesses, daughters of one of the most powerful rulers in known space, had rejected the finest academy in existence. They had chosen instead to study with a primitive human on a backwater planet that most species could not even find on a star map. The galactic press could not get enough of it. Reporters camped outside Frank's property for weeks. News drones circled overhead like metal birds. Diplomats from 100 different species demanded explanations. The Galactic Academy released statement after statement, calling the situation an insult to centuries of tradition. Frank ignored all of it. He had work to do. The old barn had been standing empty for years. It had been built by Frank's grandfather, a solid structure of wood and stone that had survived countless Montana winters. Now Frank looked at it with new eyes. He spent 2 weeks cleaning it out. He repaired the roof and fixed the windows. He installed heating for the cold months and fans for the summer. He built shelves along the walls and filled them with books. Hundreds of books ordered from stores across the country. He set up a large screen connected to galactic education networks. He arranged comfortable chairs for reading and desks for writing. He turned the old barn into something new, something that had never existed before, a school, but Frank knew he could not do this alone. He was a soldier, not a teacher. He knew how to survive and fight and lead, but there was so much more that Vera and Kessa needed to learn. So he asked for help. His neighbor was a woman named Betty Crawford. She was 71 years old and had been a teacher for 40 years before retiring. She had taught English literature in high schools across the state, and her students still sent her letters thanking her for changing their lives. When Frank explained what he needed, she did not hesitate. "About time someone stood up for those girls," she said. "I saw the news reports. That academy sounds like nothing but bullies in fancy uniforms." She agreed to teach literature and history. She arrived at the barn the next day with boxes of her own books and a determination in her eyes that reminded Frank of generals he had known. His friend Joe Patterson was a different kind of help. Joe was 68, a retired astronaut who had been part of the first human mission to Mars. He had walked on another planet. He had looked back at Earth from millions of miles away. He understood the universe in ways that most humans never would. Joe agreed to teach astronomy, physics, and mathematics. He brought star charts and diagrams and a small telescope that he set up in the field behind the barn. "Never thought I would be teaching alien kids," Joe said, grinning broadly. "This is going to be fun." And Frank himself would teach what he knew best: survival, ethics, how to stand your ground when everything tried to knock you down. When Vera and Kessa arrived for what would have been their fourth escape, they found something they did not expect. Their shuttle landed in the same field as always. They climbed out with the same tired, defiant expressions they always wore after fleeing the academy. They walked toward the farmhouse, ready for hot chocolate and a few days of peace before reality caught up with them again, but Frank was waiting for them in front of the barn. "Welcome to the Morrison Academy," he said. "School starts tomorrow at 8. Vera stopped walking. She stared at the barn, at the lights glowing warmly through the windows, at the sign Frank had painted and hung above the door. "What is this?" she asked. "This is your new school," Frank said. "No bullies. No politics. No one telling you that you are not good enough. Just learning. Just growing. Just becoming who you are meant to be." Kessa's tail began to wag so fast it became a blur of silver fur. "Really?" she whispered. "Truly?" "Truly," Frank said. Kessa threw herself at him and hugged him tight. Frank was surprised for a moment, then he hugged her back. After a long moment, Vera joined them the next morning. Classes began. Betty Crawford stood at the front of the barn, holding a copy of a book called To Kill a Mockingbird. "This is one of the most important books ever written by humans," she said. "It is about justice, prejudice, and the courage to do what is right even when everyone around you says you are wrong." Vera and Kessa listened with complete attention. They had never had a teacher who spoke to them this way, as if their thoughts and feelings mattered. Joe Patterson took them outside at night and showed them the stars. "That bright one there is Mars," he said, pointing upward. "I walked on it. I left footprints in its red dust. And every time I look up at it now, I remember that nothing is impossible if you have the courage to try." Kessa asked 1,000 questions about what it felt like to walk on another world. Joe answered every one, and Frank taught them about survival. Not just physical survival, though that was part of it. He taught them how to read people, how to understand what someone truly meant beneath their words. He taught them about strategy, about knowing when to fight and when to wait. He taught them about the kind of strength that did not come from muscles or weapons, but from inside. "True strength is not about dominating others," he told them one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "True strength is about protecting what matters. It is about getting back up every time you fall. It is about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier." Vera thought about this for a long time. At the academy, they said strength was about winning, she said. About being better than everyone else. About never showing weakness. "That is one kind of strength," Frank agreed. "But it is the weakest kind. The person who has to prove they are strong all the time is usually the one who is most afraid." Word continued to spread. Diplomats came to observe. They arrived in expensive ships and watched the classes with confused expressions. They did not understand what they were seeing. "This is absurd," said an ambassador from the Varelian collective. "You are teaching royal princesses in a barn. You have no credentials, no certification, no approval from any galactic institution. That is correct, Frank said calmly. The Galactic Council could shut you down. They could remove the children by force. They could try. The ambassador stared at him. You are either very confident or very foolish. Probably both, Frank admitted. But here is the thing. Those girls are learning. They are happy. They are becoming stronger every day, and that matters more to me than any approval from your council. Journalists wrote endless articles about the Morrison Academy. Some called it a joke, a primitive human playing at education. Others called it revolutionary, a challenge to centuries of galactic tradition. Empress Lorena watched everything from afar. Her communications with Frank were brief but encouraging. My daughters laugh again, she wrote to him. They speak of books and stars and a strange earth food called pancakes. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it. Frank kept doing it. Weeks turned into months. The leaves changed color and fell from the trees. Snow covered the mountains and the fields. The barn grew warm with the heat of the fire and the energy of learning. Vera discovered a love for military history. She read accounts of human wars and conflicts, finding patterns and lessons that applied far beyond Earth. Your species is fascinating, she told Frank one day. You fight each other constantly, and yet you also create beauty and kindness. You are contradictions wrapped in contradictions. That is a pretty good description of humanity, Frank agreed. Kessa found her voice through poetry. Betty introduced her to the works of Maya Angelou and Robert Frost, and something sparked inside the young princess. She began writing her own verses, mixing human forms with Volheri mythology. Listen to this one, she said one evening, reading from a paper covered in her careful handwriting. It is about finding home in unexpected places. The poem was beautiful. Betty wiped tears from her eyes. Even Vera, who usually hid her emotions, looked moved. Frank listened and watched and felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. He had served his country for 3 decades. He had fought in wars and saved lives and done his duty. But this was different. This was building something. This was helping 2 young people find their way in a universe that had tried to break them, and it was only the beginning. Spring came to Montana, bringing warm winds and green grass, and the sound of birds singing in the mornings. 6 months had passed since the Morrison Academy opened its doors. 6 months of learning, growing, and becoming something new. Vera had changed. The angry, frightened girl who had hidden under Frank's desk was gone. In her place stood a young woman with fire in her eyes and confidence in her voice. She had grown taller, filled out with muscle from the physical training Frank had added to her lessons. But more importantly, she had grown on the inside. She spent hours studying military history. Not just human history, but the wars and conflicts of dozens of galactic species. She found patterns that others had missed. She developed theories about strategy and leadership that impressed even Lieutenant General Briggs, who sometimes joined their lessons through video calls. Your species is remarkably creative in warfare, Vera said one afternoon. She was looking through records of something called guerrilla tactics. Most galactic powers rely on overwhelming force. They build bigger ships, gather more soldiers, crush their enemies with raw power. But humans adapt. You find advantages where none should exist. We have had a lot of practice fighting each other, Frank admitted. It is not something to be proud of. But we learned hard lessons along the way. It is still impressive, Vera said. The Volheri believe that power comes from strength. But you have shown me that power can come from cleverness, from patience, from understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. Kessa had changed in different ways. Where her sister had become a warrior, Kessa had become an artist. Betty Crawford's literature classes had opened something inside her, a door that had been locked her whole life. She read everything she could find. Human poetry, human novels, human plays. She fell in love with the way humans used words to express feelings that seemed too big to hold inside. She began writing her own poetry, blending the ancient traditions of the Volheri with the forms she learned from Betty. Your work is extraordinary, Betty told her one morning. They were sitting in the barn, surrounded by books and warm sunlight. You have a gift, Kessa, a real gift. Thank you, Kessa said softly. Her tail swayed with happiness. I never thought I had anything special. At the academy, they said art was useless. They said it was weakness. Art is the opposite of weakness, Betty said firmly. Art is how we make sense of the universe. It is how we connect with each other across time and space and culture. Never let anyone tell you that beauty has no value. But the most important lessons came from the hard times. It happened on a warm evening in late spring. Frank was in the barn, grading papers. Vera and Kessa were outside, enjoying the last light of the day. Everything was peaceful. Then Frank heard the sound of engines. He walked to the window and looked up. A sleek transport ship was descending toward his property. It was not Volhari, and it was not human. The design was unfamiliar, angular, and aggressive. Frank felt his instincts kick in. Something was wrong. He grabbed his shotgun and walked outside just as the ship landed. The rear hatch opened and a group of young aliens stepped out. There were 6 of them, all about Vera's age. Most of them were reptilian, with green scales and cold yellow eyes. They wore the uniform of the Galactic Academy. The leader stepped forward. He was tall and thin, with scales that glittered like dark emeralds. Frank recognized the species from Vera's descriptions. Kasori, the same species as Torvis, the boy who had pushed Kessa into the coolant pool. Well, the leader said. His name was Draven, though Frank did not know it yet. Look what we have found. The little beasts, hiding with the primitives. Vera and Kessa had come around the corner of the barn. They froze when they saw the Kasori students. Frank watched as the old fear crept into their faces. Their ears pressed flat. Their shoulders hunched. What are you doing here? Vera asked. Her voice was steady, but Frank could hear the strain beneath it. We came to remind you of your place, Draven hissed. The galaxy is laughing at you. The mighty Volhari princesses, running away to play in the dirt with apes, pathetic. Leave us alone, Kessa said quietly. Why should we? You embarrassed the academy. You embarrassed all of us. And now everyone thinks they can question the old ways, challenge the old traditions. All because 2 weak little dogs did not know their place. Frank moved closer, but he did not interfere. Not yet. He wanted to see what the girls would do. Vera's hands were shaking. For a moment, Frank thought she might run. He saw her glance toward the farmhouse, toward safety. Then something changed. Vera straightened her spine. She squared her shoulders. She looked Draven directly in the eyes, a gesture of challenge among predator species. You came all this way to insult us? She asked. Her voice was calm now, almost amused. That seems like a tremendous waste of time and fuel. Draven's scales flushed darker with anger. I came to remind you of your place. My place is wherever I choose to stand. Vera gestured at the farmhouse, the barn, the mountains rising in the distance. This human taught me that. He taught me that strength is not about domination. It is about protecting what matters. It is about getting back up when you are knocked down. Kessa stepped forward, standing beside her sister. Her voice was stronger than Frank had ever heard it. You are a bully, Draven, she said. You are small and scared, and you make yourself feel big by hurting others. But we are not afraid of you anymore. We have learned things you will never understand. We have found a home you could never take from us. Draven's eyes widened with rage. He took a threatening step forward. His claws extending from his fingers, Frank's shotgun cocked with a sound that echoed across the property. Now then, Frank said, walking slowly toward the group. His voice was calm, almost friendly. I believe my students asked you to leave. I suggest you respect that request. Draven spun to face him. You dare to threaten me? Do you know who my family is? Do you know what we could do to this miserable planet? I know exactly who you are, Frank said. You are a scared little boy who only feels powerful when he is hurting people weaker than himself. And right now, you are on my property, threatening my students? So, I'm going to give you one chance to get back in your fancy ship and fly away. If you do not take that chance, we are going to have a problem. For a long moment, no one moved. The air felt heavy with tension, then driven back down. He hissed something in his own language and gestured to his companions. They retreated to their ship, glaring at Frank and the girls the whole way. As the ship rose into the sky, Vera let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said. Frank shook his head. "I did not do anything. You two stood up for yourselves. That was all you." Kessa smiled, a real smile that showed her fangs. "We learned from the best." That night, they sat on the porch together. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was warm and sweet. "What you did today was brave," Frank said. "But more than that, it was right. You did not fight them with claws or weapons. You fought them with words and truth. That is the hardest kind of fight." Vera nodded slowly. "At the academy, they taught us that fighting meant violence. That strength meant making others submit." "There are many kinds of strength," Frank said. "And the kind you showed today is the rarest of all." Kessa was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "I want to write a poem about today," she said. "About courage. About finding your voice when everyone tries to silence you." "I would like to hear it when you are done," Frank said. Kessa smiled. "You will be the first." Vera looked up at the stars, thinking about everything they had learned, thinking about everything they had become. "Frank," she said, "will you teach me to shoot?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "Because I want to know how. Because knowledge is power. And because the next time someone threatens my family, I want to be ready." Frank considered this. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "we will start with the basics." Vera smiled. It was the smile of a warrior finding her path, and Frank smiled back, proud of both of them in ways he could not put into words. The year passed faster than anyone expected. What had begun as an experiment, a desperate solution to a desperate problem, had become something far more. The Morrison Academy had changed not just Vera and Kessa, but everyone who touched it. Betty Crawford said she had never felt more alive. Joe Patterson called it the best year of his retirement. And Frank, who had wanted nothing but peace and quiet, had found a purpose that filled the empty spaces in his heart. Now, the time had come to prove it all meant something. Empress Lyrana returned to Earth with a delegation unlike any that had come before. There were educators from a dozen different species, diplomats who had questioned the experiment from the beginning, journalists hungry for a story. And at the center of them all was High Magistrate Cerise, a senior member of the Galactic Council sent to evaluate everything that had happened. Cerise was a Valkyrie, tall and thin, with silver blue skin and eyes that seemed to look through everything they saw. The Valkyrie were known throughout the galaxy for their devotion to tradition and their contempt for anything new or different. They had been among the loudest critics of the Morrison Academy from the very beginning. Frank watched them arrive from his porch. Ships filled his fields, more than he had ever seen. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he stood his ground. This was not about him. This was about Vera and Kessa. Empress Lyrana approached him first. She looked different than she had a year ago. There was something softer in her eyes, something that might have been hope. "Thank you," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Whatever happens today, thank you for what you have done for my daughters." "It was my honor," Frank said. He meant it. The evaluation took place in the barn. Chairs had been arranged for the visitors, and Vera and Kessa stood at the front. Ready to show what they had learned, Vera went first. She presented a thesis she had written over the past months, a detailed analysis of adaptive military strategy. She compared human guerrilla tactics with traditional Volheri pack hunting techniques, showing how both approaches shared common principles. She discussed famous battles from a dozen different species, drawing connections that no one else had seen. The military experts in the audience leaned forward as she spoke. They asked sharp questions, trying to find holes in her arguments. Vera answered everyone calmly and completely. When she finished, there was silence. Then one of the experts, a grizzled Volheri general who had fought in wars across 3 star systems, began to nod slowly. "This is excellent work," he said. "Original, thorough, and deeply insightful. Several galactic military academies would be fortunate to have you. Vera smiled slightly but said nothing. Frank felt pride swelling in his chest. Then it was Kessa's turn. She had chosen to recite poetry. Not just her own poetry, but a selection of works that traced her journey over the past year. She started with Maya Angelou, speaking the words with a quiet power that filled the barn. Then she read her own work. The poem was called Finding Home. It spoke of darkness and fear, of running through cold stars looking for safety. It spoke of a small planet that the galaxy had forgotten and an old soldier who opened his door to strangers. It spoke of learning to stand again after being knocked down, of finding family in unexpected places. By the time she finished, several of the visitors were wiping their eyes. Even High Magistrate Cerise seemed moved, though he tried to hide it. Betty Crawford was openly crying. She did not care who saw. When the performances were over, Cerise stood and walked to the front of the room. The other visitors fell silent, watching him. "I came here expecting to see failure," Cerise said. His voice was cold and formal. "I came expecting to see primitives playing at education, wasting the potential of two royal children. I came prepared to recommend the immediate termination of this experiment." He paused, looking at Vera and Kessa. "I was wrong." A murmur went through the crowd. Cerise continued. "What I have seen today is remarkable. These two young women have grown in ways that the Galactic Academy could not achieve in years. They have developed sharp minds and brave hearts. They have learned to think for themselves, to stand for their beliefs, to find strength in places the galaxy does not expect." He turned to Frank Morrison, who stood quietly at the edge of the room. "Tell me, human, what is your secret? What have you taught them that the finest institution in the galaxy could not?" Frank thought about the question for a long moment. Everyone was watching him now, waiting for his answer. "I did not teach them anything special," he finally said. "I just treated them like people. I listened to them. I believed in them. I gave them a safe place to grow and make mistakes and figure out who they wanted to be. That is it?" Cerise asked. "That is everything," Frank said. "The Academy treated them like products to be shaped. I treated them like people to be nurtured. That is the only difference." Empress Lorena stepped forward. Her violet eyes met Frank's. "What do you want?" she asked. "Name your reward. Wealth, titles, lands on any world in my dominion. Whatever you desire, I will grant it." Frank considered the offer. He thought about the past year, about everything that had happened. He thought about the sound of Kessa's laughter and the fierce determination in Vera's eyes. He thought about how full his farmhouse felt now, how alive. "I reckon I would like for Vera and Kessa to visit whenever they want," he said. "This is their home as much as it is mine." Lorana smiled. "Granted, and maybe you could send some more students my way? It seems like there are a lot of kids in this galaxy who do not fit the mold. A lot of young people who need a place to belong." Lorana's smile grew wider. "That can also be arranged." 3 months later, the Morrison Academy became an official galactic institution. Betty Crawford was appointed Dean of Humanities. She accepted the position on the condition that she could continue teaching her classes personally. Joe Patterson became head of sciences, and he promptly tripled the size of the telescope field. Students began to arrive from across the galaxy. They came in small ships and large ones, alone and in groups. They were Volheri and Kasori and Valthari and a dozen other species. They were the misfits, the outcasts, the children who did not fit the rigid molds of traditional galactic education. Frank welcomed every one of them. The farmhouse expanded. New buildings rose in the fields. The barn remained the heart of the academy, but now it was surrounded by dormitories and laboratories and libraries. Vera and Kessa visited often. They had duties now, responsibilities as princesses of the Volheri Dominion, but they always came back to Montana, to the place where they had found themselves. "This is home," Kessa said one evening. She was sitting on the porch with Frank, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "No matter where we go, no matter what we do, this will always be home." Frank nodded. "You are always welcome here. Both of you, always." Vera joined them, carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to Frank and one to Kessa. I have been thinking about the future, Vera said. About what kind of leader I want to be someday. About how I want to rule the Dominion when my time comes. And what have you decided? Frank asked. I want to be like you, Vera said simply. Strong but kind. Fierce but fair. I want to build things, not destroy them. I want to protect the weak, not dominate them. Frank took a sip of his hot chocolate. He looked out at the academy he had built, at the lights glowing warmly in the windows, at the young people from 100 different worlds finding their place together. I think you will be a great leader, he said. Both of you. The galaxy is lucky to have you. Kessa leaned against him, her silver fur soft against his arm. And we are lucky to have found you, she said, that Frank Morrison had wanted peace and quiet. He had wanted to spend his final years alone on his farm in Montana, far from the world and its problems. Instead, he had built a school. He had raised 2 princesses. He had changed the galaxy in ways he was only beginning to understand. Some mornings, he still sat on his porch with his coffee, watching the sun rise over the mountains. But now the coffee tasted better. The sunrises seemed brighter. The silence was filled with the sounds of young voices learning and laughing. And growing, he had found something better than peace. He had found purpose, and that, Frank decided, was worth all the trouble in the universe.